If you're buying an Xbox Series X, a PS5, or an RTX 3080, then to get the most out of them, you need to do a much bigger upgrade. The display, the cables you're using, all of that has to be optimized, otherwise you're just simply leaving performance on the table. Here's the deal. All of these devices are taking advantage of HDMI 2.1. Now this looks exactly like the HDMI that we all know and love. However, it is functionally very different, not only in just the cables, which even though when you look at them, they look basically the same, but importantly, the displays that you connect them to are also different. So sit down and give me a few minutes to explain why, if you are going to be upgrading, you really do need to consider having a much bigger upgrade across the board. So to give you an example, this is something that you would think would actually be capable of getting the most out of the Xbox. So while it's a 1080p gaming display, importantly, it will run all the way up to 144 Hz, provided you're connected to a PC. The thing is though, not all of these things are created equal, because you really need to take advantage of HDMI 2.1 to get the best out of something like this. So if I hop into the settings here really quick, what you'll see is when I go to try change my resolution, obviously 1080p is the max, but I don't have 120 Hz, I don't have 4K, I don't have any of these things. The consoles are capable, but most displays are just simply not set up to take such a high quality, high bandwidth signal from a device over HDMI, right? Theoretically, the cables and everything here should be able to do 1080p 120. And as you'll see later, some devices and some TVs will do that, right? But it is all very, very confusing. So what do we need to be able to play at 4K and 120 frames per second? Well, I'm glad you didn't ask that, because I happen to have what I was able to find as the cheapest, oh God, that's heavy, the cheapest HDMI 2.1 device I could find. So this is the LG 85 series NanoCell TV. And as of recording this video, of course this stuff is going to evolve very quickly, so if you're watching this later, things may change. But as of recording this right now, this is the cheapest display that should be capable of 4K and 120 FPS. And that's not even getting into all of the other features that these consoles support, including HDR, including auto low latency mode, including FreeSync. So this is what you want to look for. HDMI 4K at 120 Hz. So with this TV specifically, it has 4 HDMI ports, 2 of which are rated for the Xbox and the PlayStation and your PC. The problem is, unless you're ready to unbox the TV and look for what it says on the port, it's kind of hard to actually know what really supports this. So now we have not only 4K as an option, but if I open it up, I can bump up to 120 frames per second. Now with 120 frames per second, you're getting double the amount of frames, depending on the game, and therefore double the smoothness. So if I wanted to play a game like Dirt 5, I would get that full experience. One thing though to note, you'll see 4K 120 requires an ultra high-speed HDMI cable included with Series X. So I am using the cable that comes with the Series X, but you can't just use any HDMI cable. You need to make sure that it is 2.1, and some cables say they are and they actually aren't. A good way to test is to see if it's thick, because all of these 2.1 cables are much thicker than a standard cable. But if you use the one that comes with your Xbox and I assume PS5, you should be fine. But the thing is, there's still more to it than this, right? Because yes, we technically have a working setup here, but there are other TVs that either do or don't have 120 support, and there are some TVs that will run at 1080p or 4K, and actually figuring out what works, if you don't want to just buy this model of TV that I've tested, can get really complicated. So there are a few things you should look for when it comes time to actually purchasing a TV or a monitor that you plan to use with the Xbox, with the PlayStation, or to use something like a 3080 if you want to go over HDMI. First of all, HDMI 2.1, but that's just the beginning, because you also need to support a full 4K 120. A lot of devices will technically support 120, but maybe it's something like 1080p. But then there are things like FreeSync. Does it support a variable refresh rate? Does it support auto low latency mode? These are all things that can make a big difference in your gaming experience, because it's not just about purely being able to play the game at 120, but you also want to make sure that you do that with, say, no torn frames. You want to make sure that you get an HDR. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this, and certainly not all TVs that you purchase right now are going to support it. But I will say, once you get it all up and running, this is a very, very nice looking experience. Now mind you, all of this will work on pretty much any HDMI display, right? Like that's not a huge problem. But if you want to get the most out of it, and honestly a lot of these games you do need to have stuff like 120 FPS, because I'll say like, Dirt looks nice, But if I wasn't running at 120 FPS right now, I could probably be playing on like a One X and I wouldn't really notice the difference. So to really get the most out of these PS5 and the Xbox Series X and the Series S, having that full high refresh rate is a big deal. So to make things even more complicated, some TVs will have a hybrid approach to supporting something like a PS5 or Series X. So this is a 2019 65-inch Vizio. Now if I hop into the settings, what you'll see is we see immediately 1080p and 120 FPS as an option. That's great. I think in a lot of scenarios, what I would like to do is play at 4K for games that don't support anything higher. But if something like Dirt has a 120 FPS option, I'll just flip my TV over into 120 Hz mode. Now, there is another option, which is to switch over to 4K. Now, by default, this is going to drop me down to 60 frames per second, which again, for most games is going to be fine. But as actually I just kind of skimmed through it, even though it says 120 Hz is an option at 4K, as soon as I do that, the TV, and specifically the Xbox, realizes that that's not a smart idea. Yeah, this refresh rate isn't supported with the resolution, so we set it to the highest resolution by this display with the frame rate. So essentially, the Xbox specifically is smart enough to know what your TV can handle, and the 4K TV details always tell you 4K 60, not 4K 120, but you can go up to native 1080p at 120. But just because you don't have a brand new HDMI 2.1 TV doesn't necessarily mean that you can't get 120 FPS gameplay. You may have to do a little bit of fiddling and lose a few pixels, but if it's me, I would much rather play at 1080p 120 if a game supports it compared to 4K 60. So what happens when we plug the Xbox Series X into a 4K 120 gaming monitor? Well, we should see at the very least 4K, but now a different set of options will show up if I actually jump in and out. So first of all, 4K, no brainer, right? However, what I don't see, if I open this up, is any support for 120 frames per second. Now that makes sense because this is equipped with an HDMI 2.0 port, not 2.1, which means that, like a lot of TVs for example, I can play games at 4K at 60 frames per second, but I can't get 120 frames per second out of it. So when it came time for us to build our ultimate next-gen gaming setup, we ended up going with an LG OLED, specifically a 2020 65-inch. Now one of the nice things is pretty much all of the 2019 and 2020 OLEDs do support 4K, they support 120 as well as stuff like the auto low latency mode and FreeSync and all that kind of stuff. But I think the real question here is once you know that you have the TV and you have your HDMI cable and everything is set, cool. But how easy is it to find a TV that will actually work? Spoiler alert, really difficult. So say I want to find a TV that will work well with my brand new PS5. So I go on bestbuy.com, I want to search for 4K TVs, because obviously I want 4K. A 70-inch Samsung, 4K, surely a 70-inch Samsung TV, even though it's only $600, will support 120 FPS, right? Oh wait, hold on. Motion enhancement technology, motion rate 120. I mean, that sounds like what I need, right? 120, clearly that's the actual move, right? Well, I found one thing. I found our NanoCell when I searched that. The NanoCell that we have across the hall, although this is a 55-inch, but it's the same thing. We know that this one works.
Right, you do.
Do you think it says anywhere? 60 Hertz.
4K at 120 Hertz.
So what you're saying right now is the only way to find out, short of finding someone who answered the question who has the TV who's tested it, a TV that is supporting the full spec what we're looking for, right? We just tested it, HDMI 2.1, all the bells and whistles, is to buy it and to try it. Look, there will obviously be videos like this one, there will be articles that will tell you, hey, look, this is a great TV for PS5 or Series X or whatever the case is. And as time goes on, these TVs are going to become more and more popular. But as of right now, it is a complete disaster trying to find any of these TVs that work well with the consoles. Sure, you can just default to buying a very expensive high-end premium TV from a Samsung, from a Vizio, from an LG, whatever the case is, and it'll probably work. But if you want to know for sure, short of finding an article or a video of someone who's tested that specific feature, it is really hard to commit to that, right? I cannot believe this is literally one of the only TVs that should do it, and it doesn't say it. I would never have known. So hang on a second. I'm coming back to that 70-inch, right? Samsung talked a big game about the 120 motion rate. 120 motion rate is not the same as 120 FPS. A lot of these TVs will run at 120 or 240, but that's with motion smoothing. That's not the same thing as 120 true frames per second. I finally found it, native refresh rate 60. I read 120 about 100 times before I finally found this very technical article, which finally tells me that actually what I really need to know is that I could buy this from a PS5 and I'm not getting what I'm hoping for. Here's the deal. There are a lot of things going wrong here. I will fully admit that these consoles are brand new and a lot of TV companies and manufacturers and specifically stores don't even really understand the differences and certainly haven't tested it, right? But there is a fundamental issue with the fact that I'm on a manufacturer's website and I can't find what I'm looking for. I'm seeing their marketing stuff, but that's not what actually I'm looking for to make this TV do what I want it to do. But outside of that, I'm having to go on these sites that have done these super thorough tests of the TV to finally get the information. It's buried on the bottom of making sure that 4K at 120 hertz is enabled, right? That's not okay. Then you've got the TV and you're gonna miss out on the next 3, 4, 5 years of gaming, never experiencing that extra fluidity that the console that you've already purchased is capable of. Thank you very much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more ranting and ravings all about the perils of the next generation of consoles. And until next time, good luck trying to get the most out of your shiny new console.